Bon dia a tothom. Hasta ahí llega mi catalán, el resto va a ser entre, entre español y inglés. Creo que Ana me presentó a mí porque yo voy a moderar la mesa de la mañana. Entonces, simplemente antes de presentar la primera ponencia, quería agradecer al comité organizador de las jornadas por darme la oportunidad de volver a mi segunda casa. No sé si ya es mi segunda o mi tercera, por orden de... Yo nací en Granada, luego trabajé, hice parte de mi vida profesional aquí en Barcelona y desde un tiempo vivo en Melbourne. Pero en cualquier caso, mi investigación ha estado durante mucho tiempo ligada a Barcelona y ya veréis en la presentación cómo muchos de los estudios o bien se hicieron en Barcelona o bien incluyeron colaboradores catalanes. Así que es como volver a casa. Así que muchas gracias a María, a Maite y a todo el resto del comité organizador por traerme. Y sin más dilación voy a presentar al primer ponente de la mañana para que podáis ya disfrutar de la primera charla. El primer ponente es el profesor Boris Quednow y nos visita desde el Departamento de Psiquiatría del Hospital Clínico Universitario de Zurich. Nos conocemos desde hace tiempo, creo que la primera vez que estuvimos juntos fue en 2006 aproximadamente en el Congreso de la Sociedad Internacional de Neuropsicología, la INS, que fue por entonces en Bilbao. Y desde entonces hemos sido muy buenos colegas y con el tiempo amigos. Y se trata de una de las figuras más importantes de la investigación internacional en neuropsicología de las adicciones. Solo por daros un indicador de la dimensión y el valor del ponente, deciros que ha publicado en algunas revistas que trascienden el ámbito de la neuropsicología, como por ejemplo PNAS, que es una de las mejores revistas interdisciplinares de ciencia y ha conseguido publicar sus trabajos sobre neuropsicología de la adicción, que es un área como muy pequeñita y muy especializada en una revista que lee muchísima gente, que es un referente internacional para todos los científicos. Sin más dilación, os dejo con el profesor Boris Quednow. La presentación se llama Social Cognition and Interaction in Cocaine Addiction. Boris, all yours.
Thank you very much for hopefully a kind introduction. I didn't understand it, unfortunately. I would like also to express my gratitude or to thank the organizers for inviting me to this really exciting Congress. And I'm really glad that I can present my work here today. I will speak about the social toxicity of cocaine. We did a relatively large study on the question, how does cocaine change social cognition and interaction? First of all, let me introduce the mechanism of action of cocaine. Cocaine is an unspecific monoamine reuptake inhibitor. That means it blockades presynaptic dopamine, serotonin, and noradrenaline transporter. And with that, we have a strong increase of these monoamine neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft. And this induces an intense stimulation of the frontal limbic reward system by a dopamine release. We think at the moment it's dopamine, but I think it's more than dopamine. It's also noradrenaline and serotonin. And specifically in the VTA and the ventral tegmental area, in the nucleus accumbens, and also in the prefrontal cortex. And associated with that, we have these acute subjective feelings of euphoria, increased drive and energy, enhanced vigilance and thoughts, and also, and I think this is one of the main reasons why the people took cocaine, a strongly elevated self-confidence. And because of that, we have a relatively high addictive potential of cocaine. Cocaine ranges somewhere between the addictive potential of heroin and alcohol, and we think at the moment that about 15 to 20% of the people who start using cocaine on a regular basis are also developing cocaine addiction during their lifetime. And considering the addictive potential and also the physical harm induced by the drug, cocaine is still regarded as the second most harmful drug after heroin. At the moment, cocaine is worldwide, and this is also true for Europe, for Spain, and also for Switzerland, the second most prevalent illicit drug directly after cannabis. And as you see here in the graph, the cocaine consumption has risen during the 90s, very strongly risen, and the first years of the 21st century. But with the financial crisis, the cocaine use dropped in 2008, 2009. But at the moment, the use is still rising again. And it is estimated by the European Monitoring Center that about 1% of the Europeans had used cocaine in the last year, and this rate is much higher, specifically in young people. For example, in people between 15 and 34. There we have about 2% of the people who said that they used cocaine in the last year. Interestingly, Spain, together with UK, are the European countries with the highest cocaine consumption in Europe. And it's estimated that about 3.3% of the Spanish population has used cocaine in the last year, at least in young people. And interestingly, in Switzerland, Switzerland does not take part in the European surveys, but the Swiss government says that only 1.2% of the young people are using cocaine. Unfortunately, I do not know any Swiss addiction researcher who believes this number. Why? Because there is a new tool of drug use epidemiology. We can now use wastewater to analyze metabolites of drugs in the wastewater. And as you see, Switzerland, or Swiss cities, are amongst the highest in Europe. Swiss cities show the highest are amongst the cities with the highest concentration of benzyleconin, one of the main metabolites of cocaine. And interestingly, the concentration in Swiss cities is even higher than in Spanish cities. And you see, I'm working in Zurich, where the concentration is much higher, or a little bit higher than in Barcelona. We know that the dependent cocaine use is associated with physical and also with mental consequences. The physical consequences are foremost cardiovascular consequences, but the mental consequences are, there we have foremost affective symptoms. We have depressive symptoms, symptoms of anxiety, an increased suicidality, sometimes at high doses or after a long-term chronic use, also a stimulant-induced psychosis. We have sleep disorders, we have an increased tendency for violence, we have a lot of social problems, and we have also cognitive problems. And the interesting question was, are these social problems, but also the cognitive problems, caused by the drug? Or are they predispositions for the drug use itself? And that was one of the main questions of our study. Another important point was, how does cocaine use affect social cognition and social behavior? And from the clinical phenomenology, we knew that cocaine users often became more egocentric and that they got emotional blunted during the drug career. And there was also an epidemiological finding showing that cocaine users have a strong risk for antisocial personality disorders. And usually the view was that the antisocial personality disorder precedes cocaine use, but it hasn't been investigated if cocaine use itself can make somebody also antisocial. And finally, we have seen in several imaging studies, here's an example where the density of gray matter was measured, an early example, and you see that cocaine users display changes in brain regions in which we know that they are crucially involved in social cognition and interaction. For example, the medial prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate region down to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the orbitofrontal cortex, the insular region, the temporolateral regions. All these regions are crucially in social cognition and interaction. And therefore, we would like to know, or the question was, do cocaine users have deficits in social cognition and interaction? And therefore, we built a relatively large study, the Zurich cocaine cognition study, in which we measured cocaine users and controls at baseline and after 12 months follow-up. And we recruited a relatively large number of users, about 100 users and 100 controls, and about 1/3 of the users were actually dependent cocaine users. And they were all broadly characterized from early information processing to classical neuropsychological performance, but also for social cognition, social decision making, genetics and gene expression and all these things. We had also some imaging stuff in this study. We did molecular imaging using positron emission tomography and magnetic resonance spectroscopy, but also some structural imaging and functional imaging, and some of the functional imaging data I will present a little bit later. And you can imagine this was a relatively demanding procedure. We got more than 1,000 requests for study participation, and more than 800 people. We did a telephone screening with more than 800 people. And after the telephone screening, we thought that about 320 would be eligible for this study. And that means they were regular users and they didn't have polydrug use. And this is a strength of our study. We had quantitative analysis of all these participants. So we saw what the people have used during the last half year. We excluded everybody with high concentrations of MDMA, of amphetamine, of opioids and all these things. We only recruited relatively pure cocaine users here, and also people with a psychiatric disease, with a axis 1 psychiatric disease according to DSM-4, have been excluded. And this ends in a sample of about 200 people, and we had to exclude about 50 people, mainly due to drugs found in the hair samples that weren't reported in the drug interview. And here's the sample characteristics of an analyzed sample or a published sample. And as you see, the numbers have a little bit decreased because we aim to match the three groups, the recreational cocaine users, the dependent cocaine users, and the controls relatively well. And we accomplished that regarding age, regarding sex, regarding the verbal IQ, and also regarding smoking activity. But it was not so easy also to accomplish it for years of education, for example. And if we look for the drug consumption, you see the recreational users already used 1 gram of cocaine per week, while the dependent users used about 8 gram cocaine per week. And we estimated a cumulative lifetime dose, and as you see here, the recreational users have already used about half a kilo of cocaine, and the dependent users have used more than 5.5 kilograms of cocaine during lifetime. Yeah? This is pretty a lot, and if you consider the costs for this cocaine in Switzerland, you pay about 100 Swiss francs for 1 gram of cocaine. And for this, you're getting an apartment. Yeah? You can buy an apartment, maybe not in Zurich directly, but in the surrounding of Zurich. Zurich is really expensive. And you see also the quantitative hair toxicology, and this, the relation between recreational users and dependent users matches very well with the self-report. And this is the cognitive result. We saw that we made a test battery of about 15 different tests. We used the Cantor battery and the Ray auditory verbal learning test and some further tests, and we grouped them into 4 cognitive domains: attention, working memory, declarative memory, and executive functions. And here executive functions means more or less organizing working memory or rule acquisition or attentional set shifting. And you see dependent users show a strong impairment of cognition. And the cognition is, the impairment is not specific. Yeah? It's relatively unspecific across the domains. And interestingly, also recreational users showed a specific amount of cognitive impairment. And here we have a very nice picture of the dose dependency of these cognitive deficits. We group the persons into their cumulative lifetime dose. You see 100, 0 to 100 gram lifetime, 100 to 200, and so on. And you see from about 500 grams lifetime, we had about 50% of the people who showed subclinical cognitive deficits. That means 1 standard deviation below the control group. And about 20% after 500 grams, about 20% of the people showed clinically relevant cognitive deficits defined as 1.5 standard deviations. And this is getting worse, much worse, after 1 kilogram of cocaine. But we were not only interested in basal cognitive functions, but also in social cognitive functions. And one of the tests that we used to measure empathy was the multifaceted empathy test. It uses photorealistic stimuli, and for each of these pictures, 3 questions are asked. What does the person feel, and how much do you feel with the person, and how much are you excited if you feel, if you see this picture. And the first question is related to cognitive empathy or emotion recognition, and the other 2 questions are related to emotional empathy. That's what a layperson understands regarding empathy. And here are some samples. What does this young girl feel? She's not only ashamed, she's also not amused. She is maybe a little bit embarrassed. This is an example of cognitive empathy. How much do you feel with this soldier, for example? This would be an example for explicit emotional empathy. And you know, the European football games are starting today. And if I see such pictures, I'm really much excited, as Antonio, I know. And then you can ask for an implicit measurement of empathy, the physiological arousal. And first of all, have a look on the results here on the left side. You see, cocaine users are completely able to discriminate emotions from visual pictures. Yeah? They don't have problems to recognize the right emotion. It's a little bit different if we look for prosody. We also did this, and they have some problems to recognize the emotion from prosody, but picture material is not a problem for them. However, they are less emotional empathetic. They rate, they give lower rates for emotional empathy in the explicit as well as in the implicit condition. But we did also another task. We presented a brief movie. Here's an example. The example is in German.
Hallo!
Hi!
Na du? Überraschung! Ich weiß doch noch, wo du wohnst.
Schön, wie geht's dir?
Mir geht's gut, aber wenn ich dich so ansehe, siehst einfach toll aus. Neuen Haarschnitt? Klasse.
Ja, danke schön.
Okay, I try to translate it. He is coming for a dinner and he's welcoming this girl, and he said, "Hey, your hair is really looking nice." And she is a little bit surprised, but okay, also grateful for the compliment. And throughout the film is stopped 45 times, and every time a question is coming up. And the question here was what does Sandra feel? Does she think my hair doesn't look good? Is she happy about the compliment? Is she angry because she feels harassed? Or she feels flattered but is also taken by surprise? And as you have recognized it, the last answer would be the right one. And the beauty of this task is that all these questions have the same structure. There's every time a non-mental interpretation, a mental interpretation which is not sufficient, but also an exaggerated mental interpretation. And interestingly, at least dependent cocaine users have problems in this task. Only slight problems, but they make more errors in this kind of theory of mind or mental perspective taking task. And if we look which kind of errors do they make, they recognize the right emotions and the right intentions, but they exaggerate it a little bit. Yeah, they the emotion, the external emotion regulation, is maybe a little bit impaired here. We also asked the people for the size of their social network. We asked how much people have you met in the last months, in your family, in your work, friends, and all these domains. And interestingly, cocaine users also reported to have a lower or a smaller social network compared to the controls. And interestingly, this was strongly correlated with the amount of cocaine consumption and also slightly correlated with the emotional empathy. But we didn't investigate only social cognition, passive social cognition. We also tried to measure active social interaction behavior. I think Antonio will speak about that more in depth later. But we applied two neuroeconomic games. I don't like the term neuroeconomic games because I think these are psychological paradigms. However, we did the distribution game, and subsequently we also did a simple dictator game. And in the distribution game, all participants had to decide for a point distribution, one of these 10 point distributions, and as you see, only the first point distribution is really fair. These point distributions here are a little bit unfair, but they are efficient because they maximize the profit for both. And these point distributions are really unfair because they are burning gain for the second player for the benefit of the first player, of player A. And after that game, the people got an additional 50 points, and from these points they could give any amount of points back to player B again. And importantly, these points have been converted to real money so that the people played for real money with the other person. And interestingly, recreational but also dependent users were less altruistic. They show less pro-social behavior. They gave less points and less money to player B. We converted the payoff for player B here together in one score and as a set score. But we were also interested not only in money distribution, interaction and money distribution, we were also interested in a very basal form of social interaction. And this basal form of social interaction is joint attention. What is joint attention? Joint attention is a shared focus of two individuals on an object, and it is achieved if one individual alerts another one to an object by means of eye gazing, speech, or by a gesture. And this joint attention is crucial for development of social, verbal, and cognitive skills because babies learn their language in that way. If I show a baby, if I point to such a flower and the baby follows my eyes and also looked at this flower and I say the word flower, the baby associates the word, the hearing, and the object together, and so he learns the word. And we know from previous investigations that if I'm initiating joint attention to somebody else, I'm a little bit rewarded. Maybe it's a trick of the evolution that we give our knowledge to our children. But we like it if somebody follows our eyes. We like it if somebody follows our gestures. And in this previous investigation, initiating joint attention was associated with a strong activation of the medial prefrontal cortex, but also with the activation of the ventral striatum or the nucleus accumbens. And therefore we used this task in the laboratory with our cocaine users, first only as a behavioral task, and we used such an interactive eye tracking paradigm. And the eye tracker recorded where the subject looks at the screen. And you have to interact with such an avatar. First of all, you have to induce eye contact, and then maybe if you initiate joint attention, you can choose one of these squares in the periphery, and if you choose a square, the system detects that, and the avatar is following. And this is really an interesting phenomenon. If you're sitting there and if the avatar follows you, you are a little bit surprised and a little bit happy, but if the avatar does not follow, you are a little bit insulted, you are getting angry. Therefore, we asked the people after each trial for their balance rating and also their arousal rating. And interestingly, we found what previous studies found: controls like joint attention, the balance is higher, and they like non-joint attention conditions a little bit less. Yeah? This is what also previous studies found. And you see, cocaine users didn't distinguish. It was not important for them if the avatar has followed or not. And interestingly, we found it also at the physiological level, this effect, because the pupil reaction of cocaine users were also blunted. Therefore, we thought that there is a blunted emotional response to this form of social eye contact. And then we went back to the scanner. This paradigm originally was originally a scanner paradigm. And first of all, you know, all these problems in functional imaging, it's hard to replicate previous findings sometimes. But in our controls, we were very happy that we found also activation of the medial prefrontal cortex and in the ventral striatum, also in our controls, as it was shown before. And then we measured cocaine users, and this is now the contrast between controls and cocaine users regarding joint attention versus non-joint attention, and you see cocaine users activate parts of the medial prefrontal cortex, of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, less compared to the controls, and also parts of the basal ganglia were less activated by this very simple form of social interaction. And we were very excited as we saw that this underactivation of the medial prefrontal cortex was correlated with the social network size. That means people who had a normal activation of the medial prefrontal cortex also had a higher social network, and people with underactivation of this area also showed a smaller social network. That means maybe this is a good demonstration that these kinds of social reward deficits shown by the cocaine users have also or play a role in their daily lives. Finally, we did another task for another form of social reward. This social reward induced by joint attention is a very implicit form of reward. And we were interested to measure also a more explicit form of social reward. Therefore, we used this very nice paradigm. And for this, the participants had to bring their favorite pop songs in the lab. We say 1 week before, please bring 10 of your favorite pop songs with you as an MP3, and also name 10 other pop songs that you like but that you didn't owe at the moment. And in the scanner there were 2 conditions. One, we played these pop songs, and after that international music experts give a feedback to the pop songs liked by the users. And the social reward condition was if the international music expert says to your pop song, hey, this is really a great song, I like the song also very much, and it's of very high quality and it's well arranged and all these things. And this social feedback, positive social feedback, was drawn as our form of social feedback. And we had also an object reward condition, because the people also could won the preferred song that they don't owe. Therefore, we had in one paradigm a social reward condition and an object reward condition. And here are the results. And it's very exciting because we found the same region that we found in the joint attention study. Social rewards or cocaine users show less activation of the medial prefrontal cortex compared to controls following social reward, and the same region was also underactivated in object reward, and therefore we think that cocaine users show a generalized reward deficit. It's not specific for object rewards, it's not specific for social rewards. Finally, I would like to briefly present also our longitudinal results. After 1 year, I told you, the people came back to our lab and we measured their hair concentration of cocaine again. Therefore, we had an objective measurement how the cocaine use has changed. And you see, we stratified the users into 3 groups in increases, and these people increased their cocaine consumption by about 300%. In decreases, the group had a reduction in cocaine consumption of more than the half, and in equal users, but the equal users were very low using group. And this is really exciting because these are the empathy data, and as you see, the emotional empathy measures were relatively stable in the controls, but it shifted in the increased users. It's getting worse when you increase your cocaine consumption, but it's also a little bit reversible if you decrease your consumption. Yeah? The emotional empathy was improved when the people stopped using cocaine or at least reduced their cocaine consumption strongly. And also in the social games, you see here, these are the controls and these are the decreases. At least the decreases are getting more pro-social after 1 year, while the increases doesn't change their behavior a lot. However, I think this is a floor effect here. And another interesting finding was we also did some impulsivity measurements, and as you see, the increases described themselves as more impulsive when they increase the consumption, while the decreases say, I'm less impulsive. Yeah? Therefore, we measured this with the Barrett impulsiveness scale. It was highly reliable in controls, but the self-description in this questionnaire strongly changes with the changed cocaine consumption. Thus, we think there is a social toxicity and a vicious circle of cocaine addiction. Chronic use may induce neuroplastic changes in brain regions and also in neurotransmitter systems involved in social cognition, in interaction, and in reward processing. And these deficits are leading to decreased social contact, to a reduction of further reduction of social reward resources, and ongoing social withdrawal, and also installing cocaine as a main source of reward, and this leads to a maintenance of cocaine use and relapse and further proceeding the chronic cocaine use. To summarize, I hope I have shown you that cocaine users show impaired emotional empathy and theory of mind abilities, show less prosocial behavior and an altered social network size, and that they show also a blunted response to implicit but also explicit social reward, but also to object reward. And we think that specifically an impairment of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex suggests that these cocaine users suffer from a generalized impairment in value representation, which motivates or which destroys their motivation to seek social environments and social interactions, for example. And we also think that the remediation of social reward by psychotherapy or training interventions might result in a counterpoint to the exaggerated drug-related reward signals in substance use disorders, and in maybe restoring non-drug-related reward signals. And finally, I'm really grateful to my team. Without my very talented and excellent doctoral students, this study won't have happened. Specifically, Katrin Preller, Lea Hulka, and Matthias Vanmos did this study, and also I'm very grateful to my collaborators. And thank you very much for your attention, and you know, say no to drugs and stay right on the beach. Yeah?
Thank you very much, Boris. Fantastic presentation.